I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to Freedom Over Fascism. Hi, friends. This is a special episode of Freedom Over Fascism, where I'm a guest on Will Fullwood's Contraband Wagon. We discussed my first understandings of race, all sorts of ideas about activism, and what it will take to build a society that works for all of us. I hope you enjoy my long and winding conversation with Will.
Welcome, everyone. Hello, come on in. Thank you for joining me here for this conversation. Everyone's having a great morning or afternoon or evening, depending upon where you're tuning in from. Super excited to have this be my first live stream of the Contraband Wagon on Substack. So this is very awesome. Thank you to you, Stephanie, for being my first, which I love.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Great, great. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into it here. And then as people come in, feel free to just put your questions and comments in the chat. I will be taking a look at them and trying to bring as much as I can into the conversation as possible. But I'm just gonna go ahead and introduce myself and get into it, guys. My name is Will Fullwood, creator of the Contraband Wagon, where I'm changing the conversation on race. And I just want to welcome you all to this live stream, my first live stream on Substack. So thanks for being here for that. And um, basically, just a brief explanation of this live stream and what I'm doing, right? I'm having conversations with people about the subject of race, okay? And that's exactly what we're going to do here with my guest, Stephanie. I'm so glad to have her here. So, don't forget, anyone can be a part of the Contraband Wagon. All you have to do is go to my website, www.thecontrabandwagon.com, click on the Submit Application button, and just by filling out the very brief application, I'll respond to you via email and we'll set up a date and time for us to have a 30-minute pre-live stream Zoom call. Okay. And during that call, I'll give you some background about the show. You can ask me any questions. We can collaborate on what we might talk about. And then if we're both amenable, then we'll choose a date and time for your live discussion with me. Okay. And that is the process that our guest today, Stephanie, went through. That is the process every guest has gone through. Stephanie, I believe you're guest number 145. 144,
Wow.
145. Yeah. So we've been doing this for a while now, and we're continuing to move forward with new technologies, new platforms. And that's what brings us here today. Welcome, Danny. Thanks for joining us. Um, so yeah, I would love to hear from more of you. Okay. If having a conversation about race is something that interests you, then consider applying to the show and engaging in the conversation. And if kind of this is too intimidating for you, right? Like maybe doing the live stream is a little bit much. We do have other options. Okay. You can go to my meetup group, www.meetup.com/racism discussion group. Okay. And on the racism discussion group, we have monthly closed Zoom round robin discussions on race. Okay. These are not recorded, these are private. Been doing these for a long time. And it's just a more comfortable and safe environment for some people to have the discussion. So feel free to join us there as well. And actually, that meetup group does host all of the events that I have for the conversation, excuse me, for the Contraband Wagon, including these conversations. Okay. So if you're interested in keeping track, you can click on the link in the chat. All right. So, our guest for today, without any more delay, Stephanie G. Wilson, PhD. Really happy to have her here to talk about race today. And actually, we were on a live stream together with
Mhm.
Walter Ryan, our friend Walter Ryan, and I just really had a great time chatting with her and Walter. And immediately, I was like, "This is someone I need to have on the show." I feel like we could have a really great conversation about this subject. And when I was first reaching out to you, Stephanie, you had mentioned, "Oh, all these things are coming back." You were reflecting and remembering things, and so I'm so excited to hear what you've remembered and what reflections you've had. And if you're ready, we're gonna jump right in, and I'm gonna ask you our first question of the day. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So the first question that I typically ask every guest who comes on the Contraband Wagon is, what is your evolution of race consciousness? And what I mean by that is, when did you first kind of learn that there were these things called races or racial categories, right? And that you were put in one of them and that other people were put in different ones. And that depending upon how you were categorized, that your life experiences, your outcomes can be heavily impacted and affected, and that the environment around you was kind of somewhat dictated by these racial categories. So, when did you first learn about race, and how did your understanding change over the course of your life?
You know, this uh, so I grew up in Southern California
Okay.
in a really white evangelical Mormon Catholic area, and the two categories of people who lived near where I was were on its surface, um, white people and Mexicans.
Okay.
There weren't that many Black people in my, let's say, high school. So, um, but I'm Jewish. So the idea of race being applied to Jews was always in my consciousness because it it was clear that we were different. There were only like 5 other kids in my school that were Jewish. So I always felt a bit othered. So before I get to the whole, color race situation, um, I I felt, yeah, and, I had friends telling me I was going to hell because I didn't accept Jesus and, well, all those sorts of microaggressions. So I've always been pretty aware of microaggressions. The first time I remembered thinking about, race as in black and white is there was a girl in my classes. She was a cheerleader. She was in the honors classes. She was black, and she's beautiful, and I was like, "Oh my god, do all Black people have beautiful skin like that?" And that was, like, the first, like, thought that I was like, "That is just amazing. That is, like, I don't know, she's glowing." You know, so it was never negative for me. It was this weird sense of camaraderie that I probably only me my side from my end felt because I appear white.
Mm,
Um, and I do have the privilege of white skin, but I have the non-privilege of not being Christian. So, so there were only a couple of Black kids um, in my schools, but there were Mexican kids, and there was small comments that my parents would make about Mexicans, but not about Black people. Like, it wasn't even, except for my grandfather, who was like Archie Bunker,
mm,
sitting there being hateful to just about everybody. Um, Told me to go play on the freeway, stuff like that. Um, so race consciousness has always been a little bit weird and different for me because it wasn't I didn't have a lot of Black people in my life,
mhm,
and when I did, I felt like, and I'm sure this is one-sided, but I felt sort of a kinship even though had no idea what their life experience was. They must have been they were very high middle class, people, so it wasn't like Black equals poor,
mhm,
situation.
yeah.
Um, and it wasn't like Black equals stupid. They were all in the smart kids class, and it wasn't like Black equals not popular because they were the popular kids. And so it's a little bit, I feel different than a lot of people might have had experiences with it.
Oh, yeah. I think that your experience that you're describing so far is definitely in rarefied air there.
Mm.
That definitely not most people's experience. And yeah, this is very interesting. There's certain parts that I want to kind of highlight real quick. Um, so first of all, I want to be clear, like, racialization, right? It includes things outside of white and black, right?
Mhm.
Latino people are racialized, Asian people are racialized, right? So having black people in your geographic area or, having grown up with them or not doesn't really dictate, right? Like, necessarily how much you end up learning about racialization, right? Like, for instance, for you, you grew up Jewish, right? And so thinking of the Jewish people as a race of people, right? Like, you had that kind of ingrained in you from a young age, right? And
Well,
then,
not exactly.
okay.
Like, as Jews, would always say we're not a race, but
Oh,
the
okay.
Hitler defined us as a race. The
Okay.
white supremacists, the Aryans defined us as a race. So there was always this tension between we know we're not a race, there are people and it's a different thing. Because there are Jews of every color, there are Jews from everywhere in the world. But knowing that we would be put in that, could be put in that position at any moment,
That's maybe that
was,
yeah, I
yeah.
see, I see, okay, so having the history of being othered, right, and having that being passed through to you, that's what gave you that kinda kinship, I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense now, okay, so that's kind of how you were raised and you grew up. You said you grew up with mostly racialized white people and, people who are, racialized as Latino and Mexican specifically, you said ethnic,
Mexican
right?
specifically, because it's Southern California. And the interesting thing about that is when I was younger and was like playing, club rec sports and whatever, it
Mhm.
was really integrated. Like it, I didn't notice any sort of real difference um, between me and the Mexican, generally girls who were in my on my teams or whatever. And then when we hit high school, it diverged. They were finding their own identity. The the white kids were like, that's when there became much bigger uh differences outwardly and also like sociological, uh, uh like it didn't seem to make any impression on me while I was younger and like on teams and with these kids, but when we all hit um high school, it diverged and it became much more segregated.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of mirrors my own experience. I had a lot of integrated experience in my elementary school years. In my middle school years, I would say slightly less, but still fairly integrated. And even my high school, my public high school was significantly integrated. But I was in classes with all racialized white people. As one of the few gifted chosen black people, to be in the advanced classes. So um, yeah, I think one thing that I remember, and I wrote a poem for those who are interested on my YouTube channel, you could check it out. It's called Contraband of Race War. And in it, I talk about being in the cafeteria line and going to sit down. And that was actually a high school experience when I turn and I look at the cafeteria, big old cafeteria, and it is racially segregated. You could just very clearly see on one side, there's all the racialized white people. On the other side is the racialized black people. And then there's like a smattering of people, a small smattering of diversity in the middle. And of course, that's directly where I went, because, I didn't want to separate myself like that. And so, yeah, I definitely hear you. In high school, people are learning their identities to figure out who they are, right? And one thing that's happening to a lot of people who are not racialized as white is you're starting to experience racism more and more frequently. You're starting to recognize racism more and more frequently. You're starting to reflect upon what it means for your life. And you're also losing a sense of innocence and a sense of security that you may have had in the past, right? Just like anyone who goes through something that's kind of very close to your identity, right? And closely related to your identity, that's a negative experience. It makes you rethink, okay, well, what is my life really going to be, because we're given these stories, narratives about what our life should be, right? The American dream, or what high school is supposed to be like, or what college is supposed to be like, or what your family life is supposed to be like, or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
From media, from all these different sources,
It's
other.
generally bullshit, yeah.
Right, exactly, it's all BS, um, and yeah, so everyone's figuring out what the truth is, right? And, so, okay, so that's happening. You are seeing racial segregation up close and personal now in high school, and, what next? Like, what's your next evolution of, like, thought on the subject of race? Because I know you've come very far from that moment to here, so,
Are you
um
calling me old?
No, I'm
Which I
calling you
am.
live.
Um, you know, I have come a long way. Um, I would say I didn't entirely realize the ongoing effects of enslavement over generations, uh, both trauma-wise and financially, um, and how communities were split. I didn't understand that until later when I, started, um, really kind of exploring the idea of racism being less about individual discrimination and more about systemic, um, like, oppression,
Mm,
really. As a country, we always ask people to solve systemic issues individually, and it took, I don't even know when, a long time for me to figure out that, oh, this is completely systemic. It's not about whether one person, is nice to another or not nice to another.
mm,
Um,
interesting. So you got the impression that this was an individual situation from the beginning. You were kind of getting the impression that, all right, this is about how individuals treat other individuals. And eventually you realize, no, 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 this is more than that. This is bigger than that. This is systemic, oppression and exploitation, and there's a generations long history of this, and so you had to kind of reset your mind to think of it that way. How did that kind of how did that process go for you? And like, was there something that triggered the change for you to think of it as an individual situation instead of like a collective, societal, systemic situation?
uh, um, can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got
And
confused in the middle.
I'll answer it for myself, okay? And that might help. So for me, right, um, I didn't really have to uh I did have people encouraging me to think of racism as an individual thing, right? As you said, we live in the same country, we grew up in the same place, and that is something our country promotes is individualism, even in thinking about these huge systemic tyrannical issues like race. Um, so I got those same kind of messages, like, oh, like if something happens, it's just that person's problem, just ignore it,
Mhm.
as long as you work hard, you're gonna get what you deserve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all this stuff. And for me, le- doing some independent study, I would say reading books about the subject of race, seeing documentaries about the subject of race, learning about the generations long history of this fight for human equality, right, and human rights, um, and then combined with the experience of of having people oppress me directly, and kind of seeing how that oppression would manifest, and I would say even more impactfully, not just the um, actual scenarios in which I experienced that, but people's responses to when I would communicate with them about what I was experiencing. That's
Mhm.
really what I think for me personally helped me see that this is bigger than just, what happened to me, like,
Yeah.
I can't even communicate with people about what happened to me. People don't want to communicate about it. People don't want to hear about it. People don't want to think about it. And I realized that there was not only that people didn't want to, but a lot of people didn't know how to communicate about what I was experiencing. A lot of people didn't even know how to conceptualize what was going on in my life sometimes. And so it was that lack of human connection over something that was so impactful and important in my life that made me realize, okay, this is big, and I already knew it was big, but I was taught that race was over, right? That
Oh,
oh,
yeah,
art is,
1980s, colorblind.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
we live in a colorblind society now, is what I grew up being told. Even though I laughed at it, and so did
right.
many of us didn't believe it, but many did, right? Obviously, there's still people trying to suggest that we're past race, even though, everything that's happening right now. So, but yeah, that was kind of me. That's kind of how I moved from the individual to the systemic. It was a combination of my life experience, educating myself independently, and kind of spending some time reflecting on that education, both, live and through academics, that made me realize, okay, this is bigger than I thought, and
Right.
not gonna, I'm not gonna be able to overcome it just by working hard,
Yeah. I mean, that really, uh, resonates with me because, uh, that's how I started kind of learning about the bigger picture is at in school and college, reading, um, either oral histories or histories, and being aware that, um so I was always aware that this country is not what it pretends to be. Always. Like the thought of this isn't us. Well, actually, yeah, it is. Like we don't, we don't, you know, uh, we do due process, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially,
Yeah. Cause that's what, was happening when, people were being lynched all over. That was due process, right? Um, so specific particularly, I started to get I wasn't totally, uh, political hmm, in US terms through, I guess, my 20s, but when I went back to grad school when I was 27, I studied, Middle Eastern studies.
mm,
And, particularly Israel, Jerusalem, um, less about the conflict, more about history, um, and memory. So there was a long time where I was, like, not really so focused on the United States. I was just like, "Okay, that's gonna move along without me. I don't have any particular way to change much." And I was really focused on I was in, Jewish Arab discussion groups. I was, doing a bunches of coexistence work where at my where I went to grad school, we hosted, which is Brandeis, a Jewish sponsored university. We, had a partnership with Al-Quds University in Palestine about, helping them learn how to run a university, which is essentially building civil society. So I that's where my focus was, to the point where in on September 11th, um, 2001, my friend I was in 2nd year of grad school, and my friend called me, and she's like, "Turn on the TV." I was like, "What?" She's like, "It's not Israel. It's here." I was like, "What are you talking about?" So then I turned on the TV. Like, it wasn't even so much like, I just wasn't terribly present here, and when I was, like, racism wasn't top not much was top of mind in the United States. Um I was in grad school for something entirely different, and that was sort of my focus, and, um, so
So the 9/11 happens.
then 9/11 happens, and I understand what it feels like to have the homeland attacked and not have it be across the world. Um, but again, I mean, I had opinions and I'd listened to NPR and, what was going on with post 9/11 wars and whatever. I had very strong opinions of that. And I thought it was ridiculous, to invade Iraq when I had nothing to do um, with Al Qaeda at that point. Um, but I didn't do anything activist. My activism was like across the world. Um, so when I don't know when we get through the Bush years, um, and we get to Obama, I'm like, oh my God, he's the guy. He actually, when he spoke at the 2004 Democratic convention, I was like, that's our first black president.
Mm,
And that was exciting to me. And that was like, it gave me like all sorts of warm fuzzies. And when he ran, I supported him over Hillary because I thought he was much more exciting and um, thoughtful and all the things. It was kind of a generational thing at that point, I think, because
mm.
it may have been race, I don't know, but, a lot more older people were like, "Hillary all the way," and I was like, "No, no, no." Like, Barack is like, he's the future. And, uh, and still, I wasn't doing that much of activism here. Um, and it was only in 2016, um, that I realized that I had some agency in American public life. So
Interesting. Okay, yeah, let's break that down a little bit.
right. So I I started following political people on social media for the first time. Like,
Mm,
I mean, social media for me was just like mostly friends and family at that point. Twitter was still really new and I didn't see the point. And because people were like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom now, like it was just I really didn't see the point.
yeah.
And um and that's when I started like understanding that what happened in American politics was going to affect me. Um, because I could glide right along, focusing on the other side of the world, knowing that things weren't great. By now, I moved to Boston in 1999 from California. So both of those are big blue bubbles. I moved to Boston from San Francisco. So, like, I didn't even realize that I didn't even realize that Boston was a bubble. I thought, like, San Francisco and LA were, like, the only bubbles of, uh of where people thought similarly to the way I did. And, uh, which means wanting a multicultural democracy, not feeling individually any sense of bias against Black people or so calling myself out here. I live in a town where it's white,
Mhm,
Chinese,
mhm.
mostly first generation, and Indian, combination of both first generation and all my friends, like, one was uh Taiwanese and the other one was Indian and the other one was Sikh and their kids, the Indian, my friend who is Taiwanese married an Indian guy, so her kids were mixed, and my friend who is uh, Indian married a white guy, so her kids were mixed, and like so it was a very diverse little friend group we had when my son was um, young,
Mhm.
and I'm still they're still my closest friends, and um, there's actually another white woman who's married to a Taiwanese guy. I mean, like, it's, like, really but, I find myself, like, whereas I don't feel any sense of bias against people with black skin
Mhm.
or brown skin, there's a little piece of me that I'm telling on myself right now, like, that, has a moment about Indian immigrants, right? There are a ton of them, really smart in my area, and, um I'm just telling on myself, I don't obviously, as I just described, I have some of my best friends are, um,
It's
but
okay. It's
there's
fine.
that's a thing. I mean, I don't wanna pretend like I have no sense of racial difference. I do.
Mhm.
I think it's just directed differently than a lot of white people
So what do you
in
mean
the
by
United States.
what does that mean, directed differently?
Means okay, so you know how Harvard had that you may not know, had that implicit bias, test,
I am aware.
right?
Yeah.
You're
Mhm.
aware. Everyone's aware, right? It showed that I didn't have any implicit, um, bias, again, like, there was no implicit bias with black or white
Mhm.
for me,
Mhm.
and which, of course, made me feel really good. But then, as I grow older and I really, like, self-reflect, I can say, "Okay, well, when I see these people that I don't know, maybe there's like a hint of something inside of me that is not like wholly positive. But that's not generally black white thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually there's a lot of implicit bias, explicit bias even. Uh I feel very uncomfortable around most Christians. There are some that are like really, left wing and inclusive, but there are so many more. And that goes back to my childhood when was told I was going to hell, and I was one of five other kids. But that's where I think the bulk of my bias and discomfort is directed.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you telling us that because it's important for everyone to understand that bias isn't, and discrimination is not limited to the race context, right? I mean, absolutely. We have biases against people who look a certain way, forget about skin color, just like if you are a symmetrical face or something, or people who are tall or short, or people who are male or female, or people who are gay or
Able, disabled, gay or straight, yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, no, I appreciate you bringing that up and explaining to people like that, you didn't really, you seem to have grown up in a somewhat unique way in terms of how your concept of racialization kind of developed. Um, Partially, it sounds like geography. That's something that I'm writing a lot about in my
Mhm.
now about how people's geographic location can have a significant impact on how they experience race. And so it looks like that kind of is a little bit of what happened to you. You ended up being in places where you were kind of insulated, where there was like a lot of people who shared your values,
Mhm.
and you didn't really have a kind of black white dichotomous racial environment that a lot of people experience, and that does obviously that environment, it allows you to kind of access issues of race a little more easily because of the historical conflict there in
Mhm.
America. um and yeah, the other thing that I wanted to bring up is you had mentioned earlier, very early on our conversation, how one of the first thoughts that you can remember that you had about a black girl who was like going to school with you is like her beautiful skin. And you
Mhm.
wonder if all black people have skin this beautiful, right?
Mhm.
What a what a nice, positive, and innocent thought that you had there. And that really resonated with me because a lot of people still don't realize that racialization is a thing that's taught, right? Categorizing people into these categories, putting them in these boxes, and then creating a schema whereby you believe, oh, if you're in this box, this must be true about you. If you're in that
Right.
box, be true about you, right? That is all learned behavior. That is all something that is coming from our environment, and then it seeps into us, sometimes
Mhm.
consciously, sometimes unconsciously. And I think that your story about seeing, this rare black girl and thinking about her skin and the beauty of it, and it just goes to show that, like, that was just your first innocent thought, about this person, and it was untinged by that poison of white supremacy, and I just I find it so sad when I hear people's stories about when they first kind of learn about race and racism, because a lot of it is kids being taught to hate. That's what it is. That's what a lot of people's first experiences are. It's like, no, you can't play with that person. Oh, no, don't touch that person. They're dirty. Or they hear it from someone else, right? And then they're like, oh, what does this mean about me? Or, but overall, it's typically people experiencing a lack of safety, a fear of others, right? Or that fear being kind of implanted within them for them to carry on throughout the rest of their lives. So it's interesting to hear your story because I don't really hear any of that. What I hear is um, someone who was somewhat insulated, and it looks like you were insulated by partially by geography, partially through your kind of study, what you
Mhm.
focus and study on, right? Looking outside of the United States in order to focus on Israel and what else did you say?
Palestine.
In Palestine. Um, and
Well, and also the rest of the Middle East, but I was
yeah,
less interested in that.
and and then your attention got turned back uh to the United States and thinking about race. So like let's start from there. So you kind of turn your attention back a little bit to the United States, realizing that you have agency, which I love that you said that you realized you had agency, and that's what made a big difference for you in terms of
Mhm.
okay, so I can do something. What did you think that you could accomplish? What was that kind of mind shift for you? And I just want to hear more about it if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, so the first active thing I did was writing postcards on behalf of Stacey Abrams when she was running for governor. That was the
Mm,
very first thing, and I was like, "Okay, postcards, I can do this." Like, I am not at that point, I had a young kid, I had, chronic illness, and, like, life was a lot, but, like, I could sit and write postcards. And, again, having my background, like, that it was important that she was Black, but more important to me how brilliant she is. Like, she she's incredible.
yeah.
Um, and, like beyond incredible, like, politics and novels and acting, and I don't know. She certainly hasn't, you know, I don't know what's to be for her, but she deserves every good thing. And um and that was the first thing. So, oh, okay, I can write a postcard. Um and then, when Trump, I think this is out of sequence a little bit, but
Yeah,
um Charlottesville, um the thing that got me most was that those white supremacists were first talking about Jews. Jews will not replace this,
right.
right? And a lot of the United States missed that, like, because our context has been black, white, racist, racism. And that again made me feel pretty unsafe. And even though I have white skin and I have the privilege of being able to, get pulled over and not shot, um, I still feel like it's it's a piece like the othering. I I feel more connected to the people who are othered than I do to the white majority.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can hear that. I understand that, and yeah, that must have I mean, I can't imagine being Jewish and seeing the tiki torches and hearing those chants, it's terrifying.
But
It's
you can imagine that. You
yeah,
can
I
because
can and I can't, right? Because even though there's a lot of overlap between anti-Semitism and anti-black racism, right? I feel the history is not the same, and I do believe that that difference in history um, is reflected in how these discriminatory systems manifest as well and how people experience them. So I would never say that I can understand, what a Jewish person goes through when they experience anti-Semitism. I would never say I understand what a woman goes through when she's experiencing discrimination based on her gender.
Mhm.
I don't think I can truly understand these things. What I can do is I can hear people's stories, right? And I can listen to them and I can do my best to put myself in their shoes and think about what it means for them to have experienced what they did, right? And you can get very close that way. So,
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, and this is because this is how I feel, is that I don't know your experience. I can't experience your experience, but I have empathy and I can, like, feel like what must it have felt like to never feel safe. And that is because there is plenty in my own family history of what it must have felt like to never feel safe.
mm,
So it's not the same, like, it's empathy, but it's not like I know exactly what you're feeling. It's
yeah,
getting close.
yeah, and honestly, it does so much, to bring people together, right? To at least make that attempt to find common ground, just like in anything, right? Like not just in terms of how we are both oppressed or anything like that, but like when you have common interests, right? It brings people together, right? People who
Mhm.
and that's one kind of technique that I utilize in my conversations on race, especially when I'm talking to people who don't share my values, right? The first thing I do is I find common ground. What is something
Mhm. Absolutely.
to share, and
Yeah. Even like, okay, it's Wednesday. Can we agree it's Wednesday? like like sometimes you have to start at like one common fact,
yeah,
because
let's
nothing else is
yeah,
in common.
exactly, yeah, and I literally will stop a conversation sometimes and be like, "Well, what about this?" Exactly like what you just did. Can we, like, at least just agree on this one thing? Yeah, because, I mean, we all may be living different lives, but we all live in the world, right? And we're all human beings in this world. And frankly, and a lot of people say it, but I'll say it again, which is, uh, we have so much more in common than we have, differences as humans, and, when we focus on what we have in common, intentionally, purposefully, That's when really, I think that people have breakthroughs and people develop relationships and people have even individual growth, and collective growth as well. And so, yeah, I think it's very important for us to find common ground. Of course, it becomes complicated in the race context, right? Where, there's that whole dialogue about how can I find common ground with people who don't want me to exist, right? Or where it's on the basis of me not existing is like where you want to find common ground. So,
Right.
yeah, that's when it becomes complicated, right? Not for me because the answer is yeah, no, we're not doing that, right? We're not
I
fighting.
know, right. I mean, at some point, you like, I think, a for me, I was as this whole MAGA thing got started, I was thinking, "Okay, well, I know this has always been under the surface, but now they're just saying the quiet part out loud, and, um, and maybe there's room for common ground," and then as it continued and people like, there was a permission structure for more and more hate, and there was a permission structure for more and more violence, it became clear that there are some people you will like, I will never find common ground with. And it's okay to, like, not bang my head against the wall trying and just focusing on the people that can. It's like, I don't know if you follow Anat Shankar Osorio. She's a cognitive scientist messaging kind of person who works a lot on the race class gender narrative. And and one of her big things is we need to be saying things to our choir, like preaching to the choir isn't bad. It's good because you have people like repeating things that then people in their lives might hear. And and she she didn't come up with it, but she follows a way of calling out dog whistles. Like, um, mm, you know, there's a formula,
Mm,
we share more than we all believe that we should, believe live the American dream, but some people are, trying to take away from everybody else. Um, but together we can overcome this more or less, um, in much nicer language.
mm.
Um, and I think the idea that there are people who are not persuadable and that we shouldn't try is a step that all of us have to get to differently.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I also think that instead of thinking of it as like not trying, right? I think the question is, what are we trying to do, right? Like, I like to think of it more affirmatively, right? Because,
That's fair.
yeah, I just think that our side has a problem with that, like thinking affirmatively. We are so reactive, we are reacting, 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 forever reacting. And that is one dynamic that I really want to work on changing because we don't need to react. I think that we have it in our minds a little bit that we're fighting some kind of overwhelming force that like we can only react to. I think there's like this undercurrent of powerlessness that comes along with this the way that we react to these situations.
Absolutely. And we react in totally useless, counterproductive ways. So when we react to something that they say and we repeat it because we're saying this isn't true, we're actually playing their game. We are using their framing. We're not talking about what we're for. We're talking about what we're against, and that's not actually as helpful as what if we like claimed the conversation and talked about how great it is that we have a multicultural democracy and that there are ways that we can, there are places where in this country where that is accepted and the baseline for what we think life should be. And then the hard part for me is understanding the vast divergence geographically in this country. Like I feel relatively safe in Massachusetts from guns because we have very strong gun laws. When I travel to virtually anywhere else, I'm really scared. Like, and I don't have to live with that fear every single day, but so many people do. But that's like kind of a, you know, there are places it's absolutely imperfect, but where the majority of the people are trying to achieve the thing that helps the most people.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big old country. It's a big old country, and it's sometimes you can be in one city and then you could drive an hour, you could feel like you're in a different country, in my state of North Carolina, I know it's like that. There's these liberal bastion cities, right? And then you literally drive 40 minutes, an hour into one direction, and suddenly you pass a sign that says home of the KKK, and you're like, oh. uh,
Yeah,
yeah, so I hear you on that.
yeah.
uh,
Or yeah, I'm just reminded, since you're from North Carolina, what happened this week, where a judge's house was blown up just because she did her job, and it's actually the only connection is North Carolina, but it's part of the whole big picture of how we are at odds in so many different, deep, maybe intractable, maybe tractable, I'm not sure, ways.
Well, let me posit something on that, okay? I do think tractable is the answer. And really, the depth that you're talking about in terms of where we have this divide, I think it's based on that V word that I love, our values.
Mhm,
It's all based on our values. Our values are what define what actions that we take, how we walk around in the world, how we move, the
mhm,
decisions that we make. And what we have right now in this country is a conflict of values.
mhm.
It just I mean, we've had that conflict. It's not like new, right? I mean, we've we've had conflicting values since before the country was even founded. So,
And it's the same. I mean, if you look at it, it hasn't changed
yeah.
much what those, conflicts are about,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
which,
I mean, this country made a choice, right, a long time ago. And the work that I do, Stephanie, is kind of based on making sure people understand what I'm about to kind of lay out here, which is the history, right? The history of the country. The history of the country is heavily intertwined with dehumanization, the dehumanization of others, right? Um, and I'm not just talking along racial lines, right? I'm talking about the dehumanization of women. I'm talking about the dehumanization of children. I'm talking about the dehumanization, obviously, of the Native Americans, of Chinese immigrants who came, of Irish and Italian immigrants who came to the country, of obviously the African slaves who were brought over to the country. Um, this country has a long history of embracing dehumanization as a way of gaining power and control. And we can see it happening again with the military being deployed to US cities, right? With the Supreme Court saying that we can racially discriminate in order to target people for deportation. I mean, it
Mhm.
goes on and on and on,
Right.
the legacy of dehumanization. And it's something that people typically only experience with their lives, through their lives in America. We don't teach it. We don't teach a history of dehumanization as part of the country's history. Like you can learn it. You can learn it. And there are ways of learning it and you can go different places, but it's not the focus. And nor is the focus that we fight against that history. Right? It's this very amorphous blob of a history of like, okay, we did these things. It was a thing of the time to have slaves. People were just a product of their environments. And then but so many great things came out of it, right? And
What
then,
great things came out of it.
well, this is just a story that people say, like
Alright, okay.
the country became rich, like, which is true. The country
Mm,
became rich off
off stolen labor, okay.
and there's marvels of architecture, but mostly just wealth, that was accumulated as a result of, the dehumanization and inhumanity of slavery. And and then, you know, Dr. King came and then everything was fine.
Yeah, right.
Like, that is literally the narrative that most people are getting. I like one guy I had on the show, he's doing his PhD at City College, and he was like, I was taught that slavery was here and that was bad. And then the civil rights movement and Dr. King came and that was good. Like it's a very, Dr. Seuss type history. And of course, he was an amazing leader for civil rights, just like many other people have been. Um, but yeah, I think this story that, like, after his assassination and the introduction of the Civil Rights Act and its accompanying legislation, um, that okay, we solved it, right? Sol-
Mhm.
Saw it, solved it, and it's all over. Now everyone's equal. No excuses anymore, like this kind of narrative. And that's what I grew up in. That's what both of us kind of grew up in, right? And I believed it. I really believed it, Stephanie. I believed that all this stuff was a thing of the past and that I was home free to walk into my future the way that everyone talked about that I could. And it was at 6 years old that I first realized that it wasn't true. 6 years old, okay? Um, when a kid asked me, "Hey, why don't you act black?" Yeah. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Because I literally did not know. And at that time, I had already learned a significant about the civil rights movement through home study, independent study from my parents. Going to the library, checking out VHS tapes, and like you know the movement. So he says, "You're not acting black." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you're not in a gang." He said, "Well, you don't curse." He said, "Well, you get good grades." He's just starting to rattle off all of these qualities that he believes means I'm not acting black. And they were all, in my mind, positive qualities, right? Getting good grades, being respectful to your teachers, not being involved in gang activity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my heart just broke right there, Stephanie. My heart broke in that talking to him. He
Well,
was,
my heart's breaking right now for
yeah,
you and all the kids who get that at some point. Because 'cause you're right, it's learned and it's not.
yeah. He was learning that what his identity was all of those negative things. And he was even questioning me because my existence to him was counter to how I should be living, how I should be existing just because I was racialized as black. And when I
Was he white or was he
oh, he was black.
he was
He's
black?
another racialized black kid. I was going to elementary school with all black people. And yeah, he wanted to know why I wasn't acting black. Yeah.
Oh
It
my
was
god, there's so, 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 so many layers there.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it hit me like a truck.
Yeah.
I couldn't really obviously I was 6 years old, right? I didn't have the depth of thought and clarity of thought that I have now, but I knew when I was having that conversation with him what it meant for his future that he believed those things about himself, that he was going to create the future for himself based on those negative stereotypes that he had internalized. And
Not helped along by a society that wants to reinforce that.
well, I didn't even get there, right?
Right.
Because for me, I was like, I was taught that this was over, right? So to go from that in that moment from, okay, race is a thing of the past. I can now, live just like everyone else and I don't have to think about this subject except for as a historical exercise or whatever to no, 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 no. Not only is has this young boy internalized anti-black racism so heavily that he can't even understand my existence, but every adult I've ever encountered has reinforced the idea that racism is over to me. So I'm like, and I'm just like, and so that's not true. It's very obviously not true because I'm standing here having this conversation, experiencing this. So my little 6-year-old mind was blown. I was like, I don't know what all this means, but nothing good, like
Well,
this is
yeah.
so, but it also sparked my curiosity, right? And here we are, right? Like 35 years later, you and I having this conversation on race. And that was really the impetus is realizing, wow, I've been lied to, you know,
Mhm,
I've been lied to. And that's one thing that I want to do with my anti-racism work is help people recognize that they've been lied to and deal with the grief and the betrayal involved in that because it's very difficult to learn that you've been kind of brainwashed is really what it is. You've been ideologically brainwashed to believe in a history that doesn't exist, in a country that doesn't exist, and like in a life that is imaginary. Um and that is it can be quite devastating. It was for me, I know. And most people I've talked to who have been through that feel the same way.
mhm,
But on the other side of that, right, is a level of empowerment, a level of beauty and community and solidarity that is, in my opinion, makes life much more worth living, and it's a more authentic way of living, a more
mhm.
critical way of living. And it's empowering as well. I think that not living that way, you live in fear in this country because that's what this country wants you to be living in. It wants people living in fear. It wants people to be controlled and yeah, just on the other side of embracing anti-racism is not living in fear, is feeling empowered, is feeling in community with others. And it's not like it's a panacea or anything, and like everything is going to go smoothly from there on out. Of course, you're fighting against our gargantuan tidal wave of hate that we're experiencing right now, all of us. However, within that community, you can really find the strength to push back against this hate, and the hate is not as strong as it seems. They rely heavily on people believing how powerful they are, not necessarily the actual power that they have.
Well,
And
they create a power dynamic for them to say, um, "You've lost your supremacy, so therefore you are now being discriminated against," or, um, "If I pit you against you, then you won't notice that I'm stealing from all of you."
right,
Or the people with the least power or telling, um, predominant like, let's just talk about, like, the people who the white supremacists hardcore, that the people with less power with than you are the ones that are taking power from you.
right.
When, I mean, you think about it, it makes no sense at all, but sense is not part of the equation for
Oh yeah. They don't need they use logic, but it doesn't have to be based in rationality or reality,
that's true.
right? Yeah. So yeah, just textbook manipulations and what you're describing there I call the mechanisms of white supremacy. That's what I call them as a umbrella term. But yeah. Um so you go through all this. You have finally our eyes have been open, both of us, right? And we are now seeing the world as it is. But you're finding some empowerment, realizing that hey, I can do something. I can write some postcards, right? I can politically try to move the country forward. And now here we are, almost 10 years after that. And why don't you tell me where are you at now given the Trump presidency, given the Republican Party's just complete corruption and despotism. Um, so, what are your reflections on our current political situation as it relates to um, race, but just in general as well? I'm curious about your perspective.
Well, I think that as much as we've always been a broken country, um, the Trump and the enablers and the Project 2025 people and the Heritage Foundation and the people who believe it all are working really, really hard to break it even more. And it scares the living shit out of me. Um, and I, I, so what do I do? My path was you started with postcards, and then I joined in 2020 a sort of social media parallel campaign for Biden's campaign. And then I started my own nonprofit to help people with messaging. And then that sort of rolled into a second nonprofit helping out in Indiana where I had colleagues. And then I helped do communications for a house race in Indiana. And then, which started this podcast, which I then basically took over because the other person wasn't interested, to trying to um and this is also where I get a little bit um unsure. So I do this podcast. I talk
Mhm.
to people. Um I sometimes believe people when they say that I'm saying something worthwhile. I try to believe it more. But there's a lot of times I'm like, is anybody like I'm doing this, I love it, but you know, what's it gonna fit? Like what's the difference it's gonna make? And I come back to the thing that I truly believe, which is that hope is not a state of being, it's a state of series of actions. And that if I don't do these things, that one, I will be unable to function as a human being. And two, um, it will give more people leave to stay silent. So yeah, I'm really frightened in this moment. Um, and yet there's a piece that kind of pretends that things are normal. My son and my husband just went off to look at colleges. My son's a senior in
Mm.
high school. They're looking at colleges in Connecticut. I do not like there's a piece of me that doesn't want him to be in a different state because if we get invaded by the national government, then what happens if there are roadblocks in a real war and I can't like get to him or he can't get to me. Now that is bonkers.
Yeah, it is.
It is bonkers. But I think it's real and I haven't been wrong about where things can go. Like in 2022 people were like, "Is this the bottom?"
Ooh,
Um and it was like something about, just somebody saying something racist out loud. And I was like, "Do you not understand where the bottom is? We have seen the bottom. This is not anywhere
yeah,
close to the bottom." And I think that people are finally realizing that, but um, I'm always, and now I'm going to sound far more negative than I really am because I wouldn't be doing this if I thought it was really useless. But bottom can be very, very low.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been talking about how far we're going to descend for years now, and yeah, I still think that most people don't have a realistic understanding of how far we can go. But people are going to learn one way or the other, right? And all we can do is kind of encourage people to prepare themselves and to steel themselves for what's coming, and to find those pockets of hope as well. So yeah, what you're doing is definitely valuable, first of all. But well, and I'll even go. I'll explain why I think it's valuable too. We need to create spaces where hope is allowed to exist. Okay, because most spaces that are created right now are either spaces for people to kind of be placated into thinking that they are doing something, right? So that if you come to this space, you can feel like, okay, I'm involved in something, whether that something is useful, productive, helpful, whatever. I'm just doing something. And so I can feel that. And then I can go home and I can continue pretending like everything is the same, right?
Mhm.
There's that going on. But obviously that doesn't really move us forward, right? And it keeps people kind of stuck in the same ways of thinking, the same ways of being. And quite clearly, we need to change the way that we're thinking and being right now in order to make change. So, you're creating a space for people to reflect upon that, reflect upon how they're thinking, how they're acting, how they're living, and give people a chance to make change, you know? And that does take space and time, and it's not offered. That space is offered to people, and it's not, that process is not facilitated by almost anyone. So, yeah, I think that both of us creating space for these conversations is doing exactly that work. And it may seem like nothing, it may seem like it's just pontificating, but ultimately, everything starts with our thinking, right? Everything starts with our thoughts. We think and then we act, right? And I want people's actions to be based on their values, values that they've reflected upon and cemented so that that kind of thinking becomes something that's already been done, right? You've already thought about these are my values, these are the ways that I want to live,
Mhm.
this is how I want to show up in the world. So then when something arises, you're like, I don't really have to like agonize over what I should do. I already know what to do because I already know what my values are. They're cemented. And so, yeah, that's, you're giving people a pathway to get there. And so don't ever think that those conversations are not useful. They are. They absolutely are. They're probably more useful than phone banking, to be honest. So,
Alright, well, that's fair. I also, when I do not just these live conversations, but I also want people to understand sort of where we are as a society, what some people are doing to make it better, but also where we've been and start talking about what kind of imagination and what kind of creativity we're gonna need to to do something different and better. Because what we had was obviously not good.
yeah. And how do we get from here to there, too, right? Like,
That that's the question.
yeah, it's a big one. It's what stops people, I think, from even imagining, a different kind of world. And I get that, right? Because it's overwhelming to think, oh, what it would take, because it is going to take extremely radical action. Stuff that is really drawing outside the lines, creating sustainable food systems, creating, shelter for people, like all the basic needs, right? We need to find a way to create that outside of the systems that we've become reliant on. And
Mhm,
I think that most people are not ready to engage in that work because, they're addicted to their Food Lions and their Krogers and their and their restaurants and their brunches, and whatever else, their designer clothes or whatever else it is, Starbucks,
mhm.
all the things. And yeah, we're gonna have to start letting that go. Many of us have already learned to do that and are working to do that and taking action. But yeah, we're gonna have to get that going on a large scale. That's the next step in our activism as a country. And yeah, I don't think people are ready for that, despite how much things are degrading around us. People, it's almost like people are reflexively trying to hold on
Yeah,
instead of
yeah.
realizing they need to let go.
'Cause I think that's human nature,
Oh, of
right? Like,
course,
that
yeah,
kinda change is hard, and I think people are doing it in pieces too, like, um, I haven't like, I boycott Target and Walmart and Home Depot and, did we get rid of we got rid of we didn't get rid of Disney Plus yet, but we got rid of Paramount. But I still can't get beyond, like, I still can't give up Amazon. Like,
yeah,
and that's gonna we all get places in our own time and taking whatever steps we need internally and externally to get there. But you're right. I mean, the only thing that moves, other countries, they can go out and protest every day for months because much smaller, and it's much more clear where to protest. But I think here everything works on economics, right? Like, it was only when, Disney felt the pain of losing money that they kinda went back. It was only when, um, so many people canceled their Washington Post subscription or whatever it is, like, it's the money
Yeah.
in this society.
Oh yeah. Money is definitely the highest value of most people in this society, in my opinion. I had people tell me before, the only reason I wake up in the morning is to try to make as much money as possible. I just said that is the saddest thing I've ever. I mean, that is just so sad. I'm because that's not what life is about. But people have been taught to believe that making the maximum amount of profits is what life is about. And that's what a lot of people's lives are centered around. And the country obviously leaned into that, right? Because they're all about making money. This government, is all about making money. Yeah, it can be so difficult. That's another difficulty for people who are trying to change, right? Or trying to be different or trying to be radical, is you end up having to talk to people about radically changing their entire lives, right? And it makes you seem like you're crazy or like, you're extreme or this or that, and I guess it can be seen as extreme, but really, I think that the way that we're living now is extreme. Like, the country that we have created is extreme, in the way that it devalues human life, in the way that it, ignores people's humanity, it is that's the extreme part to me. Um So reversing that narrative, that story, and getting people to understand, hey, maybe taking care of each other, maybe that's not so.
Imagine that, right?
Yeah, maybe that is what should become the norm. Yeah, it's a difficult process, but I feel very hopeful that we can get there. I think that one of the hardest parts about it, I want to get your reflection on this, is getting people to decide to invest in changing the country, like invest their money, right? Which we've already said, like a lot of people in this country, that's the highest value is collecting it,
Mhm.
getting people to choose to give it away in service of their values. I think that is a very difficult thing for people in America to do.
Yes, and the whole system of governing needs to change so that people haven't accrued so much money that the only way we work is if they give it away. Like, the government should be taking care of us better because the government is really just a conglomeration of us. Um, so, yes, people need to, like, invest in their communities, but also m the fact that there are so many people who are just so incredibly wealthy that, like, life doesn't apply to them is obscene.
Yeah. Yeah. The extreme wealth is, yeah, that's going to be a big hurdle to overcome, because even as individuals without a lot of wealth, we have a significant amount of power, much more than we have had in the past as any individual, just because of the nature of technology and how you can communicate and, spread messages and this and that, incentives out there and incentive structures for doing that. Yeah, it's a very interesting time in which we're living in, but we've got to leverage that power as well, you know?
Well, I don't think we understand so much how much power we have and how much we give away. I was just thinking that this morning. I don't remember what I was reading, but we give away a lot of the power and let um, the um, the people who want it take it away because we're scared of standing up for it.
Yeah. Um, so how do we get people out of that fear? Is my 3 steps. E
Okay, I'm ready.
Education. Step 1, education, right? You gotta understand what's going on around you and why, a lot of people are not there, they don't know, they don't understand, They don't understand this government. They don't understand this country. They don't understand the history of the country, much less the history of race. And so education is step one, in my opinion. Start with actually learning the true history of the country, what it really stands for, what it will really put its power behind. Um, Step one. Step two, self reflection. Self reflection that both you and I have done a significant amount of, right? What does it mean for you personally that this is the history of your country, that this is, you know, the history of this subject, in my case, race, that you care a lot about, right? You have to self-reflect and decide for yourself how it coalesces with your values, right? And how you want to live those values out. And then step three is you're just going to go ahead and choose your values and start executing and living them. So educate, self-reflect, choosing time, and then you live, right? And then you live. And that's what I'm doing here, like I've made a lot of transformations to my own life, cutting off relationships that were no longer serving me, people who kind of made their own decision about their own values, right? That, you know
Mhm.
what? I'm not going to fight for this place, I'm not going to put myself on the line. Maybe it's good that we're getting rid of these people, like X, Y, and Z. Those people are out there, and I'm like, okay, well, that's you. I don't agree. These are my values. I believe this is tyranny in action right in front of our faces, and we have to fight against it. So we're just not going to align on that. If you ever decide that you're going to change, you can come. But for now, I need to be around the people who are aligned with me. So
Mhm.
those conversations, right? And then um, accepting that I had been ideologically captured, right? That I was going along with this racial narrative that, like, oh, everything's equal, all this stuff is over and in the past. And like, as long as you know, show up, as long as you show up with your best self and you put your best foot forward, you'll be recognized, you'll be rewarded, you'll get what you deserve. We live in a meritocracy, all of that BS that I uh really wanted to embrace because I wanted to believe it, right?
Yeah.
And because so many other people did believe it.
Right. Well, who doesn't wanna believe it? I mean, who wants to believe that the deck is, stacked?
Yeah,
It's not a fun realization to come to.
true. And it wasn't. I'll tell you that much. It really wasn't. To have people come to you and tell you that they experienced something where you weren't even there, that told them that the deck was stacked against you. Like situations like that it's shocking. But eventually, embracing the reality of the country and my personal situation through self-reflection, right? It made me realize, okay, I need to embrace anti-racism as a value for my life. And what does that mean? It means I want to have conversations with people about race. It means I want to get other people to reflect upon their own racialization and what it means, and to fight against reinforcing racial hierarchy, you know? And even just having the conversation itself, like you and me having this conversation, to me, is an act of anti-racism. Okay, because we are actively choosing to publicly dialogue about this to let other people see.
Right.
uh, well, I've had people watch my show and then be like, oh, you had the conversation I wish I could have with my friends, you know and that can be very useful, not just as a soothing mechanism for that person, but maybe it'll give them the courage to actually engage in that conversation in their lives. And I had another guy who he does mental health work, right? And he says, I really want to show that I'm a safe racialized white person. He's a racialized white man. He's like, I want to show that I'm safe to talk about racial trauma with. And But then that same guy, when he experienced one of his supervisors doing something, saying something that was racist, he did not speak up again about that. And what he said was that he said, I felt like I couldn't speak up. Right. And then I had him kind of reflect on that. I'm like, was that true though? Was that true that you couldn't speak up, or were you just fearful of speaking up? Right. And just going through the process of him reflecting, right, and being like, "Yeah, no, I was definitely afraid of what I could say, what might happen if I did X, Y, and Z." But upon reflection, he realized, you're right. I could have said something. And it's just getting people to realize that where their power actually lies, right? And I think that it's hard for people to accept the consequences of speaking up, right? Or of standing up for your values if those values haven't been solidified within yourself, right? Through that process of self-reflection. Because if you're not steadfast in your values, then you're constantly like, okay, what am I going to lose? What's going to happen? This and that, the consequences. That's where you're focused on. But if you're living your values, what really matters is whether the action that you take is in line with your values or not. Whatever the consequences are, whatever comes, that's whatever comes. It's out of your control. What you do control is whether you live those values or not. So yeah, that's what I try to encourage people to think about and to live that way instead of living in fear. I think that anything outside of that is living in fear, you know?
Yeah, I think that I agree with you. Those are really good steps. I'm not sure that we can uh take fear away from people
Yeah,
or remove it from the
fear is part of the human condition, right? Like, I mean, yeah, we're not taking fear away from people, but what we can do is get people to overcome their fear, you
That's
know?
true.
Give
Yeah,
people an opportunity to do that. I think most people don't even they don't even conceptualize the idea of overcoming their fear, especially in the race context. They don't even think about their fears in the race context, you
it's too
know?
painful, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that just giving people that space and time to do it, I don't think it can be overestimated, the impact that something like that can have. Think about it playing a game, right? There are ways of winning a game where the clock runs out, right? Just let the clock run out. Like sometimes in sports games, the team will be 20 points behind, there's 1 minute left, like the game is over, right?
Right.
So you don't really have to do anything except for run out the clock and protect the ball. It's a similar type of situation. I don't know if I can draw a direct metaphor here from that, but like my point is to show that like we don't necessarily have to overpower people in the way that we're traditionally used to with violence, right? With violent force. There are other powers out there that exist, and I think that we've just become ignorant of that, and we're going to have to discover it if we're going to fight against the tyranny that we're facing right now in America and across the world with fascism on the rise. Because fascists use violence. Fascists use violence, and we're never going to win a battle of violence
No,
against.
no. They're the ones that have the weapons and are
Right.
willing to use them. So, one of the things that I do is, teach leadership courses where the idea is that, leadership is about actions that you take, and a good leader makes everyone around them better. It's not about, how you give orders. And one of the things that we do in there is we talk about uh, negotiation and how often. And so this is coming back to where you go. We think of negotiation as a zero sum, like I win, you lose.
Yeah.
But if we can change it to align our interests and then cooperate to do something together, it's often a much better outcome. And so I think that that's one of the changes that we need to think about making is how do we, instead of competing for scarce resources, how do we cooperate to help each other?
Absolutely. And I think that we're in such a great position to learn how to collaborate better because we're not as desperate for resources as we have been in the past, like we have a lot of abundance at this point. So, yeah, that shift in mindset to collaboration is critical. I agree so wholeheartedly, which is why I think we need to focus on our values, right? What allows for collaboration? Joint values, values that are aligned. When your values are aligned, it's much easier to kind of get over disagreements or like find, negotiate to collaborate in a way that is effective. Otherwise, we're always going to be if our values are not aligned, we're always going to be trying to find alignment where it never existed in the first place. You know what I mean? Like values are the fundamental alignment measure, in my opinion. Um,
I think there's one thing though that could be helpful as an addition, not instead of, which is to to learn the mindset of we can change the game. That that we're not locked in the um zero sum. Like I think a lot of times you have to learn how to align interests, that it's even an option, that it doesn't have to be uh adversarial or transactional,
yeah,
but that one of the ways that we can go forward is in um by aligning our values and our interests. Um like I think that's just a conscious step that we need to enforce and reinforce and reinforce, because that's not the way that we have been socialized in this country. Like we are not this whole individualism, exceptionalism is is pitting us against each other as opposed to reminding us how we could work together in a more um, collaborative, communal uh, way to bring all of us up instead of fighting against each other.
yeah, I completely agree. And we should start small, right? Like people should start locally with their own social circles, start small, try coming up with an idea for building up a system of social welfare within your own small circle, even your small friend circle. Okay, just
Mhm.
start, and where we can go from there, who knows, right? But getting your feet wet, experiencing life that way, that is what's going to start making it easier for you to make bigger and bigger changes throughout the course of your life. And it's just so rewarding to live that way, in my opinion. I love it. I love being in service to others. I love being in community with others. I love meeting people different than me, learning about their lives. I love supporting people and feeling like I have a safety net and the support system for myself as well. Our car broke down recently, just to give an example, and I had a friend who I just went camping with, and they were like, "We have a community car." They just have a car that they purchased in order to have people use it for when their car breaks down. And
Wow.
so, yeah, exactly. It's sitting there in the driveway right now. It's a community car that I was able to use, and I put some money towards the car for the next person, and I'm just use that until the car is fixed. It'll be fixed tomorrow, so I only need it for a few days, but it was very useful during that time.
It is. The people who have that kind of resources, to be able to do that is amazing, and we should, you know, I think that's very high aspiration of where we want to get to, is to be willing to and able to create those communal resources.
Yeah. I think willing is the number one. We're all able to do something. We all, and I think having a recognition of that is probably the hardest part. I think doing it is actually much easier. Like I think once people believe in their mind, like you were saying earlier, chronic illness you were dealing with I forget the other thing you said, but you had a lot going on in your life, and you were still able to find the will to write those postcards, right? And you were still able to find some level of empowerment by doing that action. And we got to get other people to get over that hump and just try something and experience it. We could talk all until we're blue in the face, Stephanie. You and I, we could just talk about it over and over and over. But ultimately, what's going to make a difference for people outside of this conversation is to do what you and I did, which is take
Right.
action. You said something was an action.
Both hope and leadership are both actions,
Yes.
series of actions. So, yeah. So hope isn't a state of mind. It's what are you doing? The actions that you're putting into the world create that sense of hope.
Yeah. And I always say, so I have my own little phrase that I say, caring is an action. A lot of people really internalize their sense of caring to say, oh no, I care about this, I care about that, I care about this. But then when you ask them what actions they're taking as a reflection of that care, then there's nothing there, you know? And so I think that a lot of people want to have beliefs about themselves like, oh, I care so much. But if your actions don't reflect that, then what is your caring amounting to? What does it really mean? You know, it's aspirational, it's not real, you know? And so how do you get from aspirational to real? Boom, you take action. You
That's
take,
right.
yeah. And if you take action based on the values that you say you care about, then you're going to be living a life that is empowering, that is creating hope, as you said, and that's what we need to do. You know, especially in these dark times. Um, you know, getting that text message from my friend, you know, that the National Guard is going to be around his house, and you know, he basically had to flee his own house. You know,
Yeah, I mean, uh,
it's crazy, it's
that's
wild.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to be there for each other as much as we possibly can in these trying times, and it's going to be a rough ride because we've been taught not to be with each other. So we're going to have to learn a new way of being. And I'm just glad I got people like you, though, Stephanie, to discuss this with um, and live this journey with, because it's that's part of the collaboration that's going to allow us to have the strength to continue while things are degrading. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having this conversation. I agree. We need to form a community by collaborating, by talking to each other in public, in these spaces where, in in real life too. I mean, like offline, but also online, where we collaborate and come together, and we invite people in to comment and to be part of those conversations. And the more conversations like this that we can have, I think, uh, encourage others to have similar conversations. And I see Deirdre said that love is a verb, um, and I think that that kind of says it all.
Oh yeah, I love that. Love is a verb. I'm using that, Deidre. I give you credit. Don't worry. But yeah, I really like that. Yeah, and hopefully, you know, my goal for the future for the Contraband Wagon is to create live events where I'm having these kinds of conversations live on stage, you know, for people to witness, for people to be able to come up and just ask questions, make comments, tell stories, just giving people that space and time, right? So that they can decide what actions they want to take and then be empowered to do it. And then I'll continue doing my online conversations. I'm live streaming on this on Twitch as well. And Yeah. And then I'm also going to be doing online seminars eventually where I have like a curated program where people can go ahead and walk step by step through those 3 steps I talked to you about: education, reflection, and decision time. Thank you so much for allowing me to get some of those thoughts out and for sharing your journey with us from innocence into wherever we are now. Realization of how much power we need to kind of transform our world. And I'm glad that you're putting your time and energy towards that. And if you ever need anything, you know, if you ever need an assist, I'm out here. So don't
All
forget.
right. Well, likewise. And yeah, thanks for having me on. And everybody, you can find me at freedomoverfascism.us. Please subscribe. And I am sacrificing making money for doing this work. So anything that anyone wants to do, if you want a paid subscription, that would be great. Everything's free anyway, though.
Yeah.
I don't
Same
believe in
here.
paywalls.
This is all free for you guys to consume and whatnot. But just like Stephanie, we're both taking a financial hit to do this. That's just the nature of the work, you know, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. It's really within your power to support us and to subscribe. You know, consider a paid subscription to Stephanie, and you can support me via Patreon. You can support me in many different ways. Okay. I'm sure you can, all the links are in the chat there, so you can check them out. But I just also want to thank you guys so much for joining in and tuning in to listen to us talk about these things. And, you know, I'm sure we'll have much more to talk about in the future. This is an ongoing problem. It's an ongoing battle. And just remember that if you are someone for whom our discussion resonated today, that there are other people out there like you sharing your values, out there working to change their country and their world one step at a time, one action at a time within their own social circle. And you can too. All right. Don't feel disempowered. Feel hopeful and empowered just like us. And we're here to collaborate with you in the future as well. So think on that. Reach out. All right.
Right.
All right. Well, Stephanie, thanks again. And I'll be seeing you in the future, I'm sure, on future
Absolutely.
lives and on the Substack streets. So I'll see you
That
around.
sounds great. All right. Take care. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. So long.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. Please subscribe at www.freedomoverfascism.us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,